In today's episode of Today in World War II, April 29th, the Allied resistance ends in Greece. In Germany, they're talking about how to deal with the Malta problem. A huge battle in the Atlantic takes place in this day's date. In England, Eisenhower cables Washington about should I or should I not fire Patton. Eva Braun changes her name, and it's not a good choice. The British Second Army wins the race to Denmark, and finally, all German forces in Italy surrender. Let's get started. All right, on April 29th, 1941, all Allied resistance in Greece and the mainland ended today when approximately 8,000 British, New Zealand, Australian, Greek, and Yugoslavian troops surrendered at Kalamata, Greece. And thus endeth Churchill's ill-fated decision to support Greece. And I talked about this in previous videos. I'm not going to rehash it again. I'm just going to leave this little tidbit here. I understand the sentiment. I understand that sometimes you make these somewhat symbolic decisions, but ultimately, how many of their own soldiers did they sacrifice because of that? And was it worth it? I don't know. Maybe it was, maybe it wasn't. History judges. I'm not qualified to judge here. I'm just going to say, you know, I find those issues, compelling to talk about at least. On April 29th, 1942. Remember Jan Brady, Brady Bunch, Malta, 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 right? That's my fight song in this series. Well, in Berlin, they're talking about Malta, Malta, Malta as well. Although, I don't think Jan Brady was the one doing that. Although I gotta tell you, let me do a little sidebar here, okay? I think Jan Brady, when she grew up, was actually very nice looking, and I think that she actually, in some ways, was better looking than Marcia. But obviously, and she was giving away 2 years, right? 2 or 3 years to Marcia. Of course, Marcia's going to look better in during the Brady Bunch run, but give her a couple 3 years, let her mature. Jan comes through in the clutch. Anyway, getting back to Malta, Malta, Malta. Okay. Um, it was serious enough to where the German High Command was contemplating an invasion. They even came up with a code name, Operation Hercules, but they never were able to pull the trigger. They were after all the casualties they took in Greece, they were uneasy about doing parachute drops. The Royal Navy still had assets there, and it's very similar to what was going on. The same line of thinking was going on when they were contemplating Operation Sea Lion and the invasion of England in 1940. You had very similar factors going on there. The Royal Navy was not defeated. They still had air cover. It was beaten down, but it was still there. And there was still a uh, um, significant military, army units there. And it would have been dicey if for an invasion. They would have had to go all in on that, and I don't think they were willing to go all in on that. Well, in war, sometimes, you're at a decisive point in the war. You got to go in at some point, and they never could. They vacillated back and forth, and that's why they never actually invaded Malta. And that's why Malta eventually was one of the main reasons why they lost in the Mediterranean by vacillation and not being brave and attacking, which was unusual because they were so brave. I mean, strategy wise, how they invaded Norway and how they invaded Western Europe, France, the Belgium and Holland as well, and Yugoslavia, and they were the initial offensive in the Soviet Union was also very, very innovative and very bold. Where's the boldness now? I mean, thank goodness they didn't have it. I'm just curious. And then on April 29th, 1943, we're on the end game of the Battle of the Atlantic. Now, I'm going to tell you about this convoy, and you're going to hear me and say to yourself, well, Don, how can this be a convoy? The U-boats did really well here. Well, I'll tell you in a second. So there was a Allied shipping convoy, ONS 5, or excuse me, ONS, excuse me. They had 42 ships, seven escorts. Dönitz sent 40 German U-boats. So over a few days, the convoy lost 13 ships, about 63,000 tons. But the escorts took out seven U-boats. So it was kind of a draw in a sense, I suppose. I mean, the U-boats took a lot of losses, and of course, the convoy lost a lot. But this we're still at the very end of April. I'm going to tell you in the next few days, next week or so, what happens in May of 43. I'll just give you a hint. It's known as, the Germans call this Black May. A little foreshadowing there. On April 29th, 1944, it was almost Black April for General Patton because Eisenhower, on this date, he sent a cable to Washington, D.C. to General Marshall, his boss in the Joint Chiefs, and said that he was pondering the notion of firing George Patton because he simply does not keep his mouth shut. And he was referring to that incident that I explained a few days ago in my video series here about how he was misquoted by a reporter. And he had said that the Soviet Union, UK, and the US were going to be the leaders in the post-war world. And that gave the impression to Ike that he was insulting the Soviet Union. He didn't. But all that matters is in the press, right? I mean, the retraction never carries as much weight as the initial headline. That's just the way it works in PR. Well, luckily, Eisenhower did not do that because he would have deprived us of our best general in the end game from the Normandy invasion on to Berlin. Well, Soviets to Berlin, us to the pre-agreed upon boundaries post Yalta. And on April 29th, 1945, Eva Braun changed her legal name to Eva Hitler after marrying Adolf Hitler. That's so sweet. I mean, what a traditional gal. She could have been a feminist. She could have said, you know what, I'm my own person and I'm keeping my name. Or she could have done the hyphen, Eva Braun Hitler. That'd be weird. I don't know. What could be more weird than being Eva Braun Hitler? Ugh, right? But then again, why would you be with this man anyway? Well, besides the fact that he was all powerful, blah, 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 blah. But nevertheless, right? Women are attracted to power. Doesn't matter if they're monsters or not, I suppose. But that was interesting, right? I mean, I'm not sure. I'm not a woman. I can't say that. But I tell you what, if my daughter came to me and said, Dad, I'd like to change my legal name to my husband. Oh yeah? What's your husband's name? Bundy. You mean not Al Bundy? No, no, the other guy, the one who killed women. Yeah. Wow. Anyway, very significant day on April 29th, 1945. The British Second Army captured Lauenburg, just south of Hamburg. And why is that important? It's important because, number one, it trapped all of the German troops inside Denmark and it secured the Baltic ports. But what is more important is that they got there before the Soviets did. And that meant that um, that they denied Stalin Denmark, denied the Soviet Navy post-war of having free access in the Baltic to get out into open sea. So I will give Montgomery his due here. Good job, Field Marshal. This, you did a good job. You understood the context of post-war, and you made sure that by doing that, you kept Scandinavia away from the Soviets and communism. So that's awesome. And finally, just as a footnote, April 29th, 1945, the all of the Axis forces in northern Germany surrendered. That campaign was over, and boy, was it bloody and difficult. And again, not the best terrain to try to fight your way into the heart, Fortress Germany, Fortress Europe. That's the worst terrain for that. That's it. I'm done for this day anyway. I'll be back tomorrow though.